Chapter 2. Picard sat warily in the ready room as he mentally reviewed the conversation he had just finished. So far, the cup of Earl Grey was only one sip low and had grown cold. The news that Admiral Benson had just given him about the Swift Eagle's encounter did not set well, especially the news about the Borg. "Did Captain Reagan detect any signal sent by the Borg ship, Admiral?" Picard had asked, hoping that the answer would be at least good news. They came upon the scene too late to know firsthand, but Captain Reagan doesn't think they had the chance to send any transmissions. But if they are right about the ship being from the Borg past, I don't think it will make much difference if they did send one. Picard grimaced slightly. Benson had no real concept of what the Borg Collective could do, even with the smallest amount of information. "I disagree, Admiral. True that at present the information that the Borg ship would have sent would be of no use to the Borg. However, if they were able to get some readings of the temporal disturbance and managed to send it to the Collective of the past before they were brought into our time." Benson now frowned. "I understand your point, Picard. If the Borg of the past could learn anything about how these temporal disturbances were created, they may be able to do the same." Captain Picard raised his brow. "It could change the entire history of the galaxy." He leaned back slightly in thought. "But the fact that we are still here may indicate that the Borg of the past did not get any information, or at least none that they could utilize." Benson remained silent for a moment, then nodded in agreement. "There is one other factor about Swift Eagle's encounter that somewhat disturbs me." Picard sat up closer to the screen. "So far, all of the objects that have been brought through the rifts have disappeared back to their own time minutes after they appeared. The wreckage of the ships that Captain Reagan found is still there. They did not go back to where they came from." Picard thought for a moment. "And Captain Reagan agrees that there is some intelligence behind these disturbances?" Benson nodded. "What are you thinking, Jean-Luc?" "Our assumptions have been all basically the same, that there is some intelligence that is experimenting with creating these temporal openings. We are also in agreement that there is most likely a hostile intent behind their creation. Now, for whatever reason, this intelligence has been bringing hostile forces from other times, letting them act, and then sending them back to where they had come from, leaving no hard evidence." "But now, the evidence has been left behind." "Correct," Picard said with a nod, as if whomever is behind this is no longer concerned about removing possible clues to their identity. "The same concern was expressed by Reagan's first officer. It seems that you are in agreement with her assessment that whatever is going to eventually happen is not far away from being carried out." "I would say so. Has Starfleet responded to your reports yet?" The Admiral frowned. "Yes. The continual occurrences of these disturbances, plus the destruction of Brayton II, has prompted Starfleet to send out 3 additional ships as support, along with an alert order for all colonies and ships in the region. The problem is it will take days for them to get here, and that may be too late if we're right about events." "Then, Admiral, it seems that we had best keep on our toes," Picard responded, lifting both eyebrows for emphasis. "Such is always good advice, Jean-Luc. For now, there is not a great deal to do other than wait and see what happens next, and hope like hell that we are ready for it." Picard nodded, with a frown before ending the communication. He spoke out loud to himself. But ready for what? Data sat in front of the science station too, his golden eyes scanning the text that scrolled in front of him. Both his eye movements and the text moved so fast that no human could ever hope to keep up. File after file reeled by, some dating from over 2 centuries ago, when the Federation was not much than a newborn ideal. Some were even older than that. The search parameters of any event or report dealing with time displacements produced some voluminous records. It was not so much that there were several individual incidents. There were, in fact, only a few. Rather, it was the lengthy and often extensive theories and papers based on them. Data paused the scrolling when he ran across several that were dated from the 20th century Earth. Most involved a time displacement caused, as several individuals stated, from being abducted by extraterrestrials. The android cocked his head in curiosity as he read the official conclusions that the government had finally released in the year 2024 in the United States of America. Nearly 95% of the reported abductions were simple delusions, mostly caused by drug abuse. The remaining 5% were actual abductions caused by an alien race known as the Furen. At the time, the Furen were simply curious about the pre-fusion era society and possibly some genetic experiments. They were also known for making sure that any humans that recalled the incidents and in some way had proof died before exposing the truth. Mysterious deaths and aircraft crashes accounted for many deaths of such individuals, as well as what was called drive-by shootings. No one knew exactly what the Furen did or why, as the entire race became extinct approximately 75 years after their first contact with humans. It was widely theorized that some Earth-born plague had decimated the race, but again, no one could be sure. The unfortunate tendency for a dead Furen to melt into formless protoplasm, which decayed rapidly, left little to study. No one, not even in the present time, knew from what star system the race originated, or if the entire race was truly extinct. There were, of course, the other alien visitations to Earth's ancient history, but that information was irrelevant for Data's search. He quickly surmised that the brief file of the Furen was also irrelevant to the task at hand. None of the files that he studied seemed to fit the known parameters. Not even the circumstances surrounding the visitor from Tau Alpha C that had come to the Enterprise matched what he sought. Data paused his reviews as his internal processors began to cancel out the many sources for the possible solution to the temporal anomaly. Was there simply nothing on file that matched? Data's head jerked slightly in a realization just as Picard walked up from behind. Find anything useful, Mr. Data? Data turned to face the captain. No, sir. There is nothing in our files that match the events that have occurred. Picard frowned and spoke out loud to himself. Then this is something new after all. Not necessarily, Captain, Data said. There may still be some information in the Federation database that could lead to a solution for this dilemma. Oh? Picard said, surprised at the comment. I thought you just said that you did not find anything in the files. Data gave a slight nod. That is true, sir. I did say that I had found nothing in our files that matched the phenomenon. That does not preclude such a match in the Federation database, however. The frown deepened on Picard. Data was taking the long way around telling him something. He sighed inwardly. It was best to play dumb at this point and not even try to guess what the android may be getting at. I don't understand, Data. You say there is no information, and yet you say there may be. Please clarify. Data nodded, and he quickly entered a set of commands into the station. Several file directories scrolled by as Data commented on the display. There are 83 separate entries for temporal displacement events in our files. These are declassified for our clearance level. There may be, however, many more files that Starfleet has deemed as being such importance that they remain classified beyond our clearance levels. With that said, Picard finally realized what Data meant. Then I need to ask the Admiral for getting top priority clearance. Data raised his own eyebrows. It may be that some of the files are even beyond his clearance. I suggest that we contact the Federation Council and have them clear our search with temporal investigations. Very well, Picard agreed, but I want to run this through the Admiral and let him make the inquiry. There's no need to ruffle his feathers by going over his head. A frown of puzzlement appeared on the pale gold mouth. Ruffle his feathers? Data's processors clicked in the search mode. Ah, to raise one's ire. Picard smiled. Exactly, Mr. Data. Consider not only the correct protocol, but also the inherent risk of upsetting a superior officer by going over their head. The android gave a curt nod. I shall remember that, sir. Picard shook his head slightly in amusement as he walked back to the ready room. Mr. Wolf, get me Admiral Benson again in my ready room. 10 hours went by before the communication from Starfleet's temporal investigations came through. On the view screen in the conference room was a middle-aged, sour-faced man, dressed entirely in black. He wore the unhappy expression of someone who was completely opposed to carrying out some assignment, but had been told in no uncertain terms to do otherwise. Picard introduced the impatient-looking man to the officers seated at the table. "This is Philip Gustav of the Temporal Investigations Unit. Mr. Gustav, my officers, Commander Riker, Counselor Troy, Lieutenant Commanders Worf and Data, Dr. Crusher, and Chief Engineer LaForge." "Yes, yes," Gustav spoke in disinterested tone. "I have reviewed your roster before I was ordered to make contact." "Then you already know what we require," Riker spoke in a somewhat hot tone. "I've been told that you require access to all of our files on temporal displacements and anomalies, both declassified and classified. I am entirely opposed to the idea myself, but the Federation Council has ordered otherwise, since there is a possible involvement by the Borg." "May I ask why you're so adamant about doing so?" The man looked at Picard as one would look at a lowly slave asking for pity. "Captain, there are some things that not even the President of the Federation is allowed to know about our field. Imagine what would occur if it became common knowledge that there may be an easy way to access time travel, or just how close a change in history has occurred, or even by who." "Point taken," Picard replied. "But due to the circumstances that have recently occurred, it looks as though someone may have already discovered one of your secrets." "Which is why," Gustav sighed, "I have been ordered to release information to you. However, there are some restrictions that go with doing so." "And they are," came the gruff voice of Worf, who was beginning to show signs of impatience that would surpass Gustav's. Gustav looked at Worf with minor contempt at being interrupted, but then focused on Data. "Lieutenant Commander Data, it is my understanding that if ordered to not reveal information, you will not do so, even should it mean your destruction. Am I correct in this assumption?" Data nodded. "That is correct." "Good. Then this is how we shall work, Captain," Gustav said as he turned back to Picard. "Mr. Data will be the only person to have access to the information. He will scan the files and relay only that information related to the current situation. All other information is to remain classified, and Commander Data is not to reveal any of it." "Understood," the captain replied before he turned to the android. "Is that all right with you, Commander?" "Acknowledged, sir," Data replied. "I understand the limitations and will abide by them." Picard nodded and turned back to Gustav. "Is that sufficient?" Gustav frowned as though it wasn't, but nodded. "There is one more thing, Captain. When and if you find any information concerning these events, you are to contact me as well as your command. Further, you are to check with me before taking any action that may involve temporal displacement devices, knowledge, or any other related technologies." "In other words," Riker spoke with slight annoyance, "don't destroy anything without letting you have a chance to poke around it first." Gustav nodded in affirmative. "That order comes directly from the head of Temporal Investigations, who, I might add, has complete jurisdiction over such matters, even over the Federation President." That news brought grim frowns to every officer, other than Data. It was Worf that gave a voice to the common felt concern. "What if circumstances require an immediate action and do not allow time to contact you?" The Klingon's tone was only slightly held contempt for the man who was obviously nothing more than a bureaucrat. Gustav's sour look deepened, if such was possible. He neared the visual pickup. "In such a case, don't do anything other than the minimal needed to safeguard Federation lives. I cannot underscore the importance of this enough. History, as we know it, is far more interconnected than you could possibly realize. We have no idea what the severing of even one seemingly insignificant thread may do." "In that matter, Mr. Gustav," Picard said, "I am fully aware." Indeed, he knew exactly what the pulling of one such thread could do to the tapestry of one's life, thanks to Q. "One hapless phaser beam might end an entire race, or start a war that never happened," Geordi spoke out in his own manner of understanding. Gustav nodded. "Exactly. Should you encounter an unknown vessel firing on a colony, and you destroy that vessel, it may turn out to be a time-displaced ship of ancient Vulcans, and then no more Romulan Empire. Some would say no loss, but we cannot take such a small-minded position and look at the universe in pieces. The group nodded as Picard spoke. Understood. However, just as the appearance of such a ship or ships in the present runs the risk of altering history, how are we to know if we should or should not act to preserve this timeline? Or even if this timeline is the correct one, Data added. Theoretically, we would not know either way. Not quite true, Commander, Gustav said. However, such is why it is imperative to minimize your actions. Jean-Luc wanted to follow up on exactly how Gustav would know if history had been changed or not, but decided to let that one go for now. Picard let out a sigh. Very well, Mr. Gustav. We will contact you as circumstances warrant. Picard out. The view screen went dark, and all eyes fell upon the captain. After drawing in a breath, Jean-Luc spoke. It seems like even the Council has a watchdog when it comes to time. Picard turned to Data. Data, begin searching the files as soon as possible, and let me know if you find anything relevant. The android nodded as the group stood up to leave. Picard quickly added, And Commander, I want to know before we contact Mr. Gustav. Data nodded once more. Understood, sir. Picard remained in the empty room. He could no longer think of time as a continual forward flow. Gustav was acting like an overprotected mother hen, but he did have a point. The Enterprise had met its share of time travel and travelers, but to have some malevolent force in control of time was unthinkable. Not even Q would be so unconscionable as to tinker with time in a serious way. Q. The thought passed quickly through Picard's mind. Could Q be behind this? This as quickly the thought turned into a solid no. Q was many things, but he would never act in such a way as this, to cause the deaths of innocents. It was one thing to set up an event, like their first meeting with the Borg, but to actively and purposely kill? No. Q would not do such a thing, nor was he this sloppy, if he wanted to. Still, who or what could control time and space on such a large scale? It was not long before Data summoned the command staff. Picard had, long ago, gotten out of the habit of thinking about Data's speed of processing information as being incredulous for having any sense of accuracy. The fact was, Data was very fast, and very accurate in the information that he scanned. The officers took their usual places in the conference lounge. For the past 2 hours there had been no new events reported by anyone within the sector. That was something at any rate, Riker had said, as he had updated the captain. All attention was now focused on the android as he spoke. As you know, I have been scanning all files, both declassified and classified by temporal investigations. As I had previously surmised, the clues to the temporal anomalies did lie within the classified files. Then you did find something, Riker asked. Yes, sir, Data replied. I have discovered 4 separate reports of the same temporal technology that may lead to a solution to our current problem. All 4 of these reports date back almost 100 years ago and originate from the same starship and crew that accidentally discovered it. 100 years ago? Picard exclaimed as he sat back in his chair. Why is this information that old still classified? It was given the highest priority for secrecy as soon as it was discovered, and has remained so, and for good reason. He turned fully to Picard. The technology for time travel still exists on that planet. Then someone may have discovered this technology and is using it. Data turned to Worf to answer his grim theory. That I cannot say. The reports indicate that the technology can be used to transport individuals into the past, but there are no reports that substantiate the summation that can be used to transport objects from the past to the present, nor that such transports can occur outside the object itself. Then what do you base your idea on this technology may be what's being used? Geordi asked. There are reports of temporal displacements occurring around the planet itself, and the object itself. The method of travel was indicated as stepping through a white cloud or mist created by the object in question. Records indicate that a sufficiently advanced race may be able to devise a method to focus these disturbances into actual temporal transport, though how this could be accomplished to send objects through space, in addition to considering the size of the various ships and object, is a complete mystery. We simply have too little information, but this was the best match I could find. Let us assume, then, that this technology is the cause. Where is it located? Picard asked, still not quite sure that this was the answer to the problem. Data nodded at the request. The planet is codenamed Gateway, and the technological artifact calls itself the Guardian of Forever. Calls itself? Riker put a hand up to stop Data. Wait a minute. This is an artificially intelligent artifact that can control time? Data nodded. Possibly, Commander. Despite nearly 100 years of study, it is still unknown if the Guardian is a living being, a machine, or a combination of the two. Data smiled slightly as a small part of his processing explored these possibilities. He continued his lecture. The Guardian acts as a portal through which one may observe and even enter the past. It is assumed that it was constructed by an unknown race and at an unknown time. However, one statement from the Guardian suggests that it was its own beginning and its own end, however illogical that may sound. Despite several attempts to gain information about its construction and those who lived on the planet, the Guardian has either refused or is unable to provide such answers. As its initial discovery, an accidental entry by a Starfleet officer affected a change in time resulting in the Federation not forming at all. This was only corrected when two other officers entered the Guardian and successfully prevented the change. Data paused for a moment to let the others mentally catch up. As this accident proved how easily the Guardian could be used to alter time, the log entry, the planet location, and the Guardian itself were immediately classified as alter-secret, so much so that the Federation Council ordered a mandatory mental failsafe for the ship's entire crew, excluding the command crew that were directly involved. "Oh, what?" Crusher asked. She didn't like the sound of this. The entire crew, including some bridge officers, were required to undergo mental conditioning by high-level telepathic Vulcans to block any memory of the mission. Only 5 of the command crew retained memories of the events. However, those who were mind-wiped were given a code word that removed the block and future events required their knowledge. Incredible that Starfleet would allow such extreme measures, Troy commented, aghast at the thought. Yet understandable. Indeed, Picard replied. Commander Data is basically under the same orders. Riker was now quite grim and wondering if such an order may be in wait for them. What is the status of the Guardian now, Data? Currently, only a small group of scientists and a full contingent of highly armed security officers are stationed on Gateway. The area is under communication silence except for one time every 30 days on a tight beam signal to a ship under direct command of Temporal Investigations. That's it? Crusher cut in. I would think Starfleet would have an entire star base and several ships there to prevent anyone from using this Guardian. If Starfleet were to do so, Picard conjectured, then someone may want to know why and try to discover what is on the planet that is so important as to require that level of protection. Beverly nodded in some understanding. The best way to hide something is to put it right under your nose and not call attention to it. Having been secret for 100 years, such seems to have worked pretty well, Riker added, then turned back to Data. These reports that you have read, what starship and crew made them? Data turned to Riker with an almost perceptible smile on his golden features. The report came from the u.s.s. Enterprise, Registry 1701, Constitution class. A unified gasp of shock was uttered by the group as Picard continued Data's response. Under the command of Captain James T. Kirk.